Good morrow, Ashers. Today we are here once again to discuss something a little bit more abstract than the normal stuff. So this is more of an opinion piece, which means you guys are more than welcome to give me your opinions and what you think on the subject of immersion. This happens to be the dev discussion of the week as well, so it's a very valuable input and can have a real effect on what the game might actually turn out to be. So let's jump straight into it, shall we? Right, so to put it mildly, immersion is important in an MMO, or any RPG for that matter. The biggest problem with it is that at the end of the day, it is very subjective and different between different kinds of people. So it's very hard to give a direct answer. So this piece is 100% my opinion. I'll be giving some examples and no-nos and yes-yeses that I think is personally very important to the state of immersion within an RPG. I also expect this to be a little bit rambly because I haven't scripted at all. This is purely on the fly, just talking about it. Starting off with NPCs and mobs within the world. It is very obvious that a world where everything is clinical and standing still, NPCs that don't move, don't change, or are generic in a large proportion of the world. So a merchant in this town and a merchant in that town looks exactly the same, but just has a different name tag to them. I personally think that NPCs should move around a little bit and actually communicate with other NPCs within the area. You know, just with a little speech bubble. It doesn't necessarily have to be voice acted, which obviously is really nice, but that's really, really high cost involved. So we pretty much know that Ashes isn't going to do the voice acting thing to an extreme extent. So at least have them chat to each other, whether it's only in voice bubble or not, is already good enough. The same goes for them interacting with the world around them. An NPC just standing there and not actually fidgeting with a crate or a storage container or each other is just not good enough. It just isn't what I expect from a game which is the goal to be immersed in. Going hand in hand with NPC behavior, as in neutral NPC or friendly NPC behavior, is that enemy NPCs should be diverse. Recolors of the same mob over and over again is also not exciting. Yeah, they could be a recolor, but give them something extra. Maybe a pair of horns instead of no horn, or something along those lines that makes them unique to some extent. Change their attack patterns or their physical attacks themselves, like an ice variant drops an ice field on the ground that slows you. The fire variant burns you a little bit, stuff like that. It should be more than just cosmetic. Objects are just as important. Having a world where there is only an object that is relevant to your actual interaction, so a crate that you can interact with, is also not exciting. There should be broken pots, some dirt lying around, some plants that are half cut down, or even trees that are fully grown, as well as half cut down or dead, or just variance in the actual world itself. New World, with the preview that I played a few weeks back, had a really good setting in that regard. When you walked into a town, the town felt lived in. You actually had these inanimate objects that are in varying states of wear and tear all around the world. The same with the trees. You could cut down a tree that just fell over inside the world and you can clearly see it's dead to get your wood, or you could cut down a fully grown tree to get your wood, which adds a lot of variety to the world. Thankfully, Ashes is already confirmed to be getting seasons. This in itself is already going to add a massive layer of immersion to the game. I think they'll be 1 week long each, but walking a specific path during summer will feel completely different to walking about the same path in winter. So even if that is something stupid and really simplistic, everything will feel different. Having snow instead of, let's say, a trail of mud across the ground is already going to be a big thing. Talking about snow, having your feet or your steps be shown in the snow is something that's really simplistic and actually hard to implement, but also goes a really long way to making it feel like the world is being impacted by your actual actions. I said actual too many times there. I really should stop doing that. I could ramble on for hours about how the world could be improved in small ways to increase immersion, but let's move on to something a little bit more concrete. I'm specifically going to jump into story here because at the end of the day, when you're the savior of the world, you are the one in an MMO. The entire story and your progression and how it feels to progress in that world feels empty and kind of stupid. Guild Wars 2 does this very often. You are the savior of the world. You are the one to defeat the dragons, and you've done all these great deeds. However, you're getting into a new living world story map, and suddenly you're asked to cut down trees. You are asked to collect, frickin' something stupid. Like, let me go do this menial chore for these menial people, and there's an entire army behind me called the Pact, but it falls to the savior of the world to waste his time to go and do these things. These kinds of quests ruin the experience. Now, personally, I don't have anything against the quests themselves. It is the setup of having the savior of the universe doing these quests that are the problem. That is the problem. I don't mind being asked to do these quests, but if it is a requirement to do these quests to progress the story of your epic character, that's where the flaw comes in. Put it in as an optional quest, or don't make your character this super badass, in quote unquote, the one. There are many ways to make a character feel like it's you, like you are immersed inside of him, and being the one is not it. In very few cases in an MMO setting is that the way to go. Personally, I would say that if you're building a story around a character that you play through as a player, the best way to implement it is by having the story revolve around a group of people doing it. Those 8 players / characters are the ones that took part, and you're part of that group. You are never personally mentioned. So it's more an idea of a abstract group that is saving the world. And as such, the individual in the group is kind of almost irrelevant in the grand scheme of things. So by doing that, you're kind of taking away the emphasis on the individual and spreading it across the group, and it has the added benefit of making sense in an MMO setting, because now your entire group of 10 players that completed the raid or this event or whatever the case may be are now the saviors, which could apply to any number of the thousands of players playing the game. This doesn't necessarily mean that the character doesn't need to do epic deeds. That's not how I'm saying it should work. But what it should be is that at the end of the day, anyone could have completed those quests with enough effort. And that could be you. That's kind of how we're looking at it. Now, at least nodes in Ashes will kind of have that already, because you will feel like you're impacting them node directly. You will complete a dungeon within an area, unlocking new dungeons within that area. So there's a lot of roleplay potential there already that will add immersion, but I just don't want to be the character that is the only important thing in the world, and everybody else playing is kind of just irrelevant, and the NPCs are so useless that they can't even help themselves wipe their own asses. On the subject of story delivery and dialogue in general, the actual way that the story is delivered is also really important. I've put up some footage on what not to do and what to do, basically. The idea is that at the end of the day, you don't want your NPC dialogue to be delivered in a boring way. Personally, text bubbles, again, perfectly fine. I prefer voice acting, but text bubbles are, while you're actually able to interact with the world, are perfectly fine. That creates a situation where you feel like your character is not necessarily transitioning to a different side-by-side view of the characters, as you can see on screen right now. That is horrible. That just creates a situation where you are being ripped from your character and looking at him from a third-person perspective, having a conversation. Personally, this is just disgusting. I hated this in the original Guild Wars 2 story, and it has thankfully changed to a more dynamic way where the characters are having a conversation while you are interacting with the world and playing the game normally. So it's become a lot better in Guild Wars 2, but speech bubbles themselves are not a bad thing as long as they are only readable during gameplay. Transitions should be absolutely minimally used. There shouldn't be 100 loading screens or any kind of taking away from your character for a period of time. Thankfully, again, Ashes will have mostly a singular open world with a few instance content, so loading screens will be minimized. But if I have to be actually waiting for a loading screen every time I want to act with a piece of story or anything really, I'm gonna get frustrated. In Elder Scrolls Online, which again I've put some footage up for you, you enter a bloody bar, and all I want to do is interact with whatever's in the bar. It's a 4x4 bloody room with an upstairs area, and I'm expected to transition through a complete black screen for 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds just to interact with what is inside. This is also not acceptable. This is really, really immersion breaking. So please avoid stuff like this, Intrepid. Over-the-top cosmetics has the same effect on immersion for me. It completely breaks it. The Guild Wars 2 infusion system and legendaries can be extreme. Even the mount skins are kind of disgusting, which I've put up again. You can actually see a character literally shine a mile away just because of the combination of cosmetics that he has applies to himself. Cosmetics should feel more natural and simpler. I have no problem with having something shiny on a character, but it shouldn't be stackable to such an extent that the character looks like he's coming out of a damn what can I use as an example? A damn anime, you know what I mean? Where Dragon Ball Z Goku has decided to come say hi and is blinding me with his fabulous looks. Even more so when these fabulous looks are primarily from the cosmetic store, which you have to spend real world money on. Something a bit more difficult to talk about is interacting with the world around you. ESO, which I once again put up an example for, so that's Elder Scrolls Online, has this grasping or grabbing into thin air mechanic when you interact with certain things, like a butterfly. This is only a half-assed animation and your character doesn't actually directly grab it, which doesn't help. This is a half-assed attempt that actually breaks it a little bit more for me. I say actually way too much. It breaks it for me. It needs to be 100% my character is fully and completely grabbing the resource and putting it in his pocket, or the animation should just not be present at all. Even if it isn't there at all, it still feels better than the immersion break that you experience from grabbing at thin air and still getting the resource directly. Chopping down trees could look well, because at the end of the day when you're standing nearby it and it's physically chopping the tree, that's fine. I'm getting resources by doing that. I don't have a problem as long as the axe is colliding with the tree itself. The same thing goes for mining ore, for example, where you're chopping down the ore. The pickaxe is physically hitting the resource and I'm gaining the resource in turn. That's fine. But this half-assed into thin air, it's now mine, is crap, to say the very least. For a more controversial subject this time, the idea of content guides within MMOs is kind of a hot topic, if I can put it like that. You really want your players to understand where and when they want to go without actually frustrating them, because if you don't know where to go and you don't know the world, then you kind of don't want to play the game. So it's a difficult subject to talk about because content guides are both important as well as immersion breaking. So you've got to find a balance. Guild Wars 2 does a horrible example of this. It literally just gives you a green odd ass icon that tells you this is where you need to go, plus a route marker for cities at the very least, where you physically have to go. This is a immersion baking green arrow all over the place that pushes you, whereas in ESO, which is actually a better example, you just have a compass that tells you in a general direction where you need to be going. I want these things to be disableable. The less things on the HUD or HUD that you have, the better. They should be optional for those that want to have it, or and disableable for those that don't want to have it, so that there's a best of both worlds for everyone. Maybe leave them on by default up to level, I don't know, 20, and at that stage turn them off, and then just put up a little content guide that says, ironically, that says you can re-enable this content guide with more specific information and clearer directions if you choose to, by navigating to settings, whatever. That helps already. That brings me to the final subject of what Immersion needs or doesn't need. Sound design is literally among the top ones. Yes, I brought it up last, but this is a subject that's actually really difficult to talk about, because what it requires is that anything that happens in the world needs to have a corresponding sound to it. It shouldn't be too loud, shouldn't be too soft. The rustling of leaves actually needs to have a sound behind it. Yes, it can be very faint, and yes, you might be able to change and disable it via settings, but a wind shouldn't just be a directional thing which affects the grass or the trees. It should also have a corresponding sound. Music should happen during specific portions of the game, but every other time it should be just a background feel. And even simply landing a physical attack on someone with a sword on a shield should have a different sound to what a sword hitting flesh might be. And these are little things that are very time consuming and very difficult to pin down, because everything should have it. Literally everything. Harvesting a material should have a sound to it. Harvesting different materials should have different sounds to them. If I'm chopping down iron, that should be a cling, cling, cling sound. Harvesting wood should have obviously a chopping sound. Harvesting cobalt should have a different sound to iron, in my opinion. Small things like that. The movement of an NPC should be different depending on the NPC. A spider has a skittering sound. A human has a clear step, step, step. The same with if they're running or if they're walking. All of that is small little sound designs that add immersion. And there is so much to talk about on this subject that I'm pretty much just going to leave it right there, and we can chat to it about it in the comments. For Intrepid to bring this up at such an early stage of development in their dev discussion that they do monthly, it is a very big sigh of relief from me, because it's an important subject. It's one that a lot of companies take for granted, neglect to actually implement in a decent way. Once again, actually. I really need to unlearn that. I have no idea why I keep doing it, but the word actually just sounds so good sometimes that I use it too much. It's also a little bit condescending. Needless to say, Intrepid is looking at this at an early stage, and at the end of the day, I am very happy to hear it, because it means that they care about the MMO portion of the RPG MMO. And it is a reassuring thought that they want us to give them feedback on the subject of immersion 2 years before the bloody game releases. Awesome guys, it's been great speaking to you. I am sorry this isn't a very concrete, informative video. This is more of an opinion piece. But if you like this, you can subscribe and like if you do like this kind of content rather than the more informative videos. Or if you like both, just, like it anyway. May Ashes of Creation be the best MMO ever. Cheers.